Hello, my name is Dr. Kathleen Rochester. I come from Australia, but I've taught in India many times and I love doing that. Today I'm going to talk about leadership. When we think of leaders, we most often think of kings and prime ministers and presidents, people who are in government, or we might think of leaders in the business realm or in education, teachers, people at work in charge of different departments, different businesses, different offices. We think in the church of pastors, we think of elders, we think of youth pastors, but there's also leaders in women's groups, leaders in taking care of the needy, leaders in children's ministry, and all kinds of leaders of people. There are also leaders in the family. All mothers and fathers are leaders of their children, and even grandparents have a leadership role to play. The question is, how do we find good advice about being a good leader? In the Bible, we have a lot of principles that help us with our living, and of course that includes leadership. We also have role models. We see stories of human leaders. Some are good, some are bad, and some are partly good and a little bit stupid or foolish, wrong. They're mixed. Jesus was the only human leader who was perfect. And he wasn't even a leader in the political sense, but he certainly was a leader in influencing millions and millions of people to this day. But we have an example of a role model who is both perfect and for whom we have a huge story. That's the model of God himself as a leader. Many people don't think of God as a leader, but he was a leader and he still is a leader. I recently had the privilege of being able to write a book called God the Leader, A Journey Through the Old Testament. It is available in India on Amazon India. And I learned a lot through the research for this book. And I discovered that there are many practical applications for ordinary people who are leaders when we look at the picture of God as leader. Of course, we cannot copy God in every way. We cannot be all-knowing. We cannot be everywhere at once. But there are many characteristics of God that we can copy and that we can learn from. How does the Old Testament portray God as leader? Well, there are some pictures it uses. One is the picture of a king. What do we think of with a king? A king is someone with a lot of power. A king is somebody who's ready to go and fight for the people. A king is also someone who will give laws and instructions and guidelines so that the people might live together in peace. In the Old Testament, kings also had to look after the needy, the vulnerable, the weak. We see the picture of God as a shepherd, and a shepherd is also very tender, very gentle, especially with a young lamb that's been injured. And we see the picture of him even carrying the young lamb on his shoulder. But a shepherd also has to be strong, not only gentle, because that shepherd also looks around and sees the animals, the wolves and the other animals that will want to come and attack the sheep. And so the shepherd has to use his staff to not only protect the sheep, to look after the sheep and maybe bring them out of a hole, but he needs to go and send away the animals that are wanting to hurt the sheep and maybe even eat the sheep. We see that God is pictured like a father and sometimes a mother. Now, our own fathers and mothers were not perfect, and some were more good than bad, and some were more bad than good. So we cannot let our own experience tell us everything about God as father or mother. But God is like the ideal father and the ideal mother. We also see that God is like a husband, somebody who is caring for the one he knows intimately, for the one who is closest to his heart, who he knows the needs, he knows what to do for this person because he knows them very, very well. That's our God too. There are other pictures. One is a picture of a host. It's not used a lot, but we have a picture of God welcoming people into his presence like a banquet, a wonderful feast where people come together and enjoy each other's company, but most importantly, enjoy their communication and the fellowship and time with God. God is also a helper. You know, most leaders in our world think of themselves up here and they want admiration. Of course, we should respect our leaders because they do a lot of work on our behalf. But they don't often think of themselves as being a helper who will come down to the level of the people and walk alongside them and see what they need and try to help them. But God does that. God, who is so far up there, is constantly called our helper, the one who comes down alongside of us to walk with us in gentleness and genuine help. God is also called a rock. Does that mean he can't move? No, he's also called a wise guide, and that means he has to move to walk ahead of us and to show us the way. But a rock shows us that his character is stable. That part doesn't change, even if the specific actions and specific words and decisions have to change with the situations. In some places in the story, God is very obvious. He's very upfront. He's very decisive. He's an action leader. For example, in the Exodus story, we can see where God is all the time. He's either there as a pillar of cloud in the daytime or as a pillar of fire at nighttime. He's there doing miracles to part the waters or feed the people or whatever is needed. Because his people are vulnerable. His people will be attacked and killed by the Egyptians and then some others along the way too. He needs to act decisively on their behalf, and he does. But then I think of the little story of Ruth, where you have the older widow Naomi and her daughter-in-law, who's also a widow, Ruth. They need very basic things, two vulnerable women. And in that society, if there were no men who would protect them, they could be in danger. They needed bread, they needed food, they needed a home, and they needed a husband for Ruth who could also be a protector. When we look at that story and we see how God leads, and he is a leader in that story, even though his name is not mentioned a lot of times, we know that the characters in the story do recognise and God, and they believe and they trust him. But we don't see God doing miracles and amazing things like he did in the Exodus story. Yet we do see that God meets their needs. As we get through the end of the story, we look back and we think, wow, isn't that wonderful? The way Ruth happened to meet Boaz and the way everything worked out to meet all of the needs of these two women who were seeking God. God's way in that situation was gentle and quiet. Sometimes God does speak very candidly with people who are in conversation, and sometimes he's quiet and people are not sure where to find him. And sometimes even as leaders, we need to know when it's right to speak and when it's better to be quiet and wait for the right time to be able to declare where we are working. Sometimes God's called a roaring lion, and sometimes he's as gentle as a lamb. He's very loud and he's very quiet. We see that God is a great God of planning and of order. And he's also a teacher. He's one who's training his people to live well. But then we discover that sometimes his people don't do as he advises, and they create chaos, they create a mess. What does God do then? I think of it as being rather like a parent. You know, when we have young children, we need to be with them all the time. We need to protect them, we need to guide them, we need to take them by the hand. And as our children get older, they learn to know what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. We allow them to make some choices. And sometimes they do very well, and we're proud of them. And sometimes they make foolish choices. And sometimes they even make mistakes that injure them temporarily. But where are we? As parents, we're not very far away, because we are watching them and we still want to be ready to help them. We want to be ready to pick them up, to help them to learn from their mistakes so that they can make better decisions in the future. That's like God. God wants peace. But sometimes we see God's anger. Is it anger against those who love him and want to serve him? No. Is it an anger because he hates his people? No. It's like the anger of a parent. We are often angry because we love our children and we want the best for them, and if we can see that they've made a foolish mistake, we know that it's going to harm them. We know that it's going to make something difficult for them. And so, in a way, we are grieved, we are sad, but we are also angry. That's the heart of God's anger. It comes out of his heart of love. There's a lot more that I could say. It's a very big subject, God's leadership and our leadership. But I hope that you will look at the Bible, you will see God in a new light, and it will help you with your own leadership. Don't forget that if you're able to get this book from Amazon India, then that would be great. But if you don't, see for yourselves what you can learn about God as a leader. And may God bless you as each of you is in leadership in your various ways. Goodbye.